work, including BIRAC Winner Award 2018, and is on the Forbes list of 12, top 20 self-made women in 2020. She was recently awarded the Accenture Vahini Innovator of the Year Award from Economics Times and Women Entrepreneur of the Year 2020 by Biospectrum India. So requesting Geetha to take us through the next 3 slides, introducing Niramai.
Thanks, Yogesh. Hi all, it's excellent to be part of this session of enthusiastic bio entrepreneurs and innovators and students. Niramai in Sanskrit means being healthy. Sarve santu niramayaha, let everyone be healthy. That's our motto. And in that path, when you expand, it says non-invasive risk assessment through machine artificial intelligence. That's exactly what we're trying to do, using AI to non-invasively detect health risks. Next slide, please. And the first problem, right, that we're attempting to solve is breast cancer. In fact, using AI, non-invasively enabling early detection is definitely one of the things. And in this, breast cancer is the topmost cancer that is killing women today. 680,000 women died last year because of breast cancer. And the unfortunate or a fortunate thing is that it is one of the most curable of the cancers. All we need to do is to enable early detection, not wait for the samples to go out and so on. It's just about every person, universal, irrespective of their economy, affordability, accessibility angle, and irrespective of the density or age. Why that matters is a quick view of X-ray based analysis, which is today. Breast cancer is detected using a technique called mammography, which is basically X-ray of the breast. And you'll see 2 people here. One is a 60-year-old, another 45. And you'll see that a 45-year-old actually has full white kind of breast. That means X-rays do not work on women of all age groups. And a lot of women, unfortunately, under 45 are getting detected. So what do? Next slide. We throw away X-ray. We are coming up with a disruptive new method of sensing as well as interpreting for breast cancer, early breast cancer. This is using thermal sensing. All of us are aware about thermal sensing and the thermal short infrared camera. Yes, that security guard who uses the infrared camera gives you 1 point temperature. This gives you 4 lakh temperature points, right, per person. So it's basically a heat map of temperature distribution on the chest. That is our primary sensing modality. And that is part of the computer vision that you're going to talk about, though that is a solution, path to the solution, because the technique is irrespective of whatever is the medical imaging methodology used. Okay, so we measure the temperature variations on the chest. We've developed machine learning algorithms to generate a report completely automatically. Yes, just using temperature variations without any radiation, we're able to generate automatically a report that will say whether the person in front of them has cancer or no cancer. And this is unique, made in India, first ever time. Nobody else in the world has this solution at all. It has resulted in 22 international patents. Next slide. And the key thing basically is we do not look for hard stuff or lumps, which are mostly what is visible in X-ray. We look at abnormal tissue activity. And this results in several advantages, beating the affordability accessibility issue by making it 1/20th the cost of a mammography. So many small, hospitals can have it. It makes it possible to even screen for cancer in a 17-year-old. Unfortunately, we did find a cancer in a 17-year-old with cancer, family cancer history. It is very portable, so you can actually take it out and do the screening in villages or in a hospital or at home. Thanks to COVID, we may have to do the first ever time cancer screening being done at home. So all of this is possible with simple health workers because all the smartness is taken off by the by the computer software itself. Just one next slide. So I'm not planning to go through. Okay, that's gone. Okay, yeah. So there are several phases, right? And I just wanted to flash that, and the organizers decided to remove. But it's not just about saying yes or no. I wanted to sort of bring in the fact that when you're building an end-to-end solution to solve a particular disease, and you're saying you're going to disrupt the current way of doing it, there's several elements where machine learning will help. And I would love to talk about it to whoever is interested in building end-to-end solutions. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Geetha. Wonderful work there by the Niramai team. Finally, we have Sutit Vaidya, who is co-founder and CEO of Predible Health in the panel. Predible is one of the leading startups developing AI in radiology. At Predible, Sutit leads the product vision and business partnerships for the company. He's an alumni of IIT Madras, where he developed and published papers on 3D deep learning methods for medical imaging. And after that, he decided to start the company in 2016. Sutit and his co-founders have won numerous awards and were recently featured in the Forbes 30 under 30 list for India. So, Sutit, I would request you to take us through the next two slides and quickly describe us the background of Credible.
Sure. Thanks, Yogesh, for this panel discussion, for the generous introduction. Really excited to be talking to you all about our journey and the overall discussion itself. Predible, like you said, we develop artificial intelligence in radiology. Radiology, as you all know, is a very vast field. You know, there are multiple modalities: X-rays, CT scans, MRIs, and so as you can imagine, there are several companies, many like us, who build multiple solutions in the space. Right, at Predible, we are focused initially. The way we've approached it is we focused on one particular area of expertise, and we're building something called Lung IQ. Lung IQ is our first product. So you can move on to the next slide. Lung IQ is the first product which is focused on radiology, but particularly so we are focused on images of the chest, and for the specific reason that you have so many chest CT scans that have been taken. But if you look at the number of radiologists who really have subspecialty expertise in being able to read chest CT scans, you will find a handful in each city, and much lesser so when you go out to the smaller cities and towns. More so that the experts in the large cities are often the ones who often give second opinions to ones in the smaller cities and towns. And just to give you an idea of why that is that if you look at my screen there, that tiny dot over there in that green box is basically what a lung nodule looks like. Right, and a lung nodule is actually a sign of early cancer. Right, and you can try to differentiate how that one dot is different from all the other dots that you see around it, and be able to distinguish that actually is a lung nodule, whereas the other is not. Obviously, there's a little more context than what I'm showing on the image because it's a 3D image, so you have to go a few slices up and down and actually realize that that's a nodule, whereas the others aren't. Right, and this primarily is the kind of problems that radiologists face on a day-to-day basis. Usually they are great at what they do, but problems like this you really can't. It's in nature of humans that you will end up missing. So it's well known that about 10 to 30% of these early findings of lung cancer are missed. But even if you pick them up, there's a huge consensus problem on whether how you manage these nodules, what these nodules really are. Right, and this is not just limited for lung cancer. For indicator, there are multiple such diseases which often have which are notorious for misdiagnosis. Patients will go to multiple doctors before they get final diagnosis for multiple different reasons. There's an entire category of diseases which we cater to called interstitial lung diseases, which typically takes anywhere between 10 to 12 months for you to get the right diagnosis. Right, so overall, overarchingly, there is a vast problem of radiology shortage. But we believe the way to solve the radiology shortage problem is not just by making connections and teleradiology is great, but what we are really trying to solve is how can we bring subspecialty expertise to everyone so that access to good quality, high quality radiology is available to everyone. Right, and we do that through, if you go to our next slide, do that through our software called Lung IQ. Lung IQ is a cloud-based software solution that can integrate with any CT scanner or radiology IT system, and there is no hardware layer, so we can basically plug and play with literally any hospital or diagnostic center. Once it's plugged in, every CT scan that's taken in the site gets uploaded, and all of them get analyzed for a bunch of different conditions that we diagnose, detect, analyze, right, so on. And for each of these different solutions, lung cancer, lung fibrosis, COPD, COVID-19, we generate a detailed report which is fully automatically generated, which covers all the clinical guidelines and all the findings, and often many findings which radiologists typically do not report themselves because it's often so tedious to quantify, measure, calculate a lot of these estimates. Right, so the USP for a lot of diagnostic sites is if they use Lung IQ, they often are able to give highly differentiated visual quantitative reports as opposed to plain boring qualitative reports which describe the finding itself. Right, and this is basically obviously trained on a lot of data, has been proven through multiple clinical validation studies. right? So that's about it. I'm happy to talk more about RGI and stuff like that.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you, all the panel members, to quickly describing the technologies which they are building. And with this, we'll get started with the discussion questions which we have in mind today. Now, my first question to Geetha is, please simplify what is deep learning, for all the audience who might not have the strong background for this question, and how is deep learning applied in computer vision problem statements?
Yeah, so I'll keep it short, I realize. So I just want to demystify three terms, right? So one is the AI, people use artificial intelligence, one, machine learning and deep learning. Think of it like this: deep learning is a type of machine learning is a type of AI algorithms, because AI, there are multiple ways of doing it. Machine learning also has multiple aspects of it. So just to differentiate between machine learning and deep learning with an example, let's say you want to teach a kid, to differentiate between a dog and a cat. So one way to teach it is saying dog will have 4 legs, will have a tail, and so on. So what cat also has 4 legs, but it has some, whiskers and so on. So this is one way of teaching, supervised, like features, adding in, saying like what are the features of it, and then. So this is one part of the machine learning, supervised learning were used. Now in deep learning, what happens? It is also trying to, let's say, the same problem, trying to differentiate between cat and dog, but then you don't tell exactly what to look for in the difference. Like you don't need to talk about legs and eyes and nose and all of that, right? This is how you teach a kid. Like you keep showing multiple types of dogs, and next time it's able to detect another completely sort of or different another dog as well, right? Different type of dog as well. So this, how does this happen? Because in the mental model, it's trying to figure out what features are determining cat versus dog. Do not have to tell it, it's able to determine. That's what happens in deep learning. There is a learning of patterns and features along with the sort of training you do for labels. This is in short, and this is particularly suited for computer vision problems, because that is where there are patterns which some the eyes can see, some the eyes cannot see, right? So this is roughly how I would differentiate the three pieces. And medical images form a very, very important subsection of imaging or computer vision based problems that one would like to solve, because you can't talk about how does a cancer look and all that. We don't want to teach the system about it. We want it to learn different patterns. Hope that helps.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for simplifying that, Geetha. Now, Sudeep, it would be great, if you can share your perspective on how the doctors who are interested to understand, computer vision, image processing, deep learning, be it doctors or students who are new to the field, how should they go about learning and actually implementing in their regular work?
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Yogesh. It's a great question. So obviously, I think this is over the last few years, a lot of artificial intelligence-based technologies have started to come in research and even in regular usage in a lot of places. And so I think there are a lot of places that doctors can add a lot of value when it comes to both the development and validation of these technologies, right? And one of the most simplest aspects is obviously there is always the clinical guidance and product overview and product design, right? Very simply, what use cases can AI fit in, and what use cases can AI solve is, I think, one of the most pertinent questions that doctors can help understand. But we're also seeing a lot of doctors who are getting fairly hands-on, right? I mean, there is always one thing that as engineers and as techies, we very often come across is that there is always a lot of conversation that happens on what is possible, what is not possible, right? Because you're always trying. A lot of people tend to think that AI can just do anything, and you can look at something and tell if it's cancer. And a lot of things, there's a fundamental limitation of what is in the data itself, right? And that is sort of the bridge that I think a lot of doctors want to understand better. And from that perspective, we are seeing increasingly a lot of doctors work very closely with AI vendors. And this is, I think, where doctors add a lot of value and also learn a lot of value for themselves if they actually get involved in clinical validation, right? And not just in just validating and telling me, hey, this is the number, this is how good or bad it is, but really trying to understand why is the algorithm working on these kinds of scans? Why is it not working? What were the gaps? Why did the algorithm fail on this bucket of cases? Right? And for a lot of these cases, for techies as us, it might be a little tougher to understand what is common among this set of patients or this set of images. Right? But doctors really can add a lot of value in being able to further understand what is where is it that the algorithm failing, what are those reasons, and really get involved with AI development also. So there is a lot of scope, and in my belief, I think in over the next 3 to 5 years, or maybe even shorter, who knows, there's going to be an increasing number of clinical data scientists with people from mixed backgrounds. I'm already seeing so many people with MBBS with keen interest. So many doctors who are literally coding up NLP algorithms and deep learning
Wonderful.
algorithms.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very interesting time. In the next few years, you're going to see a very strong intersection of medicine and data science. That's going to be great for the ecosystem.
Got it. Nice. It's we'll talk more about clinical evidences and working closely with the doctors to embrace for them to embrace the AI solutions. But before that, Tatha, you mentioned democratizing healthcare in your slides, right? Now we know that India is deeply fragmented across multiple levels, be it income divide, people being in urban or rural areas, gender, education, etc. And with this fragmentation, there is a huge difference in accessibility and affordability of quality healthcare. Now, given the ratio of doctors is to patients in India, AI is something which has to be implemented, right? And it can be something which is, actually democratize healthcare. So, what do you think is the potential for AI-driven products and services to truly democratize healthcare in Indian context?
Sure. Okay, thanks for the question, Yogesh. So first of all, there is a limit on the number of doctors we can produce per year. That limit is not going to fundamentally change in the coming years. Yet, the pandemic and even before that, the situation has clearly shown us that a vast percentage of our population is clearly outside the ambit of healthcare. So now the question is, how do we make healthcare available to them? We cannot really expect, say, doctors to move to the rural areas of the country. It's not possible. That's not going to happen. And there is a limit on the number of patients that a doctor can treat with current technologies today.
Right.
So I think the only way to solve this is through two ways. One is telemedicine, and the other is AI assisted. Telemedicine, how? It might not be possible to send a qualified doctor to a rural area, but it is possible to set up a basic facility with basic testing services over there. It does not cost much money, and even if it does, it is money worth spending. And it is possible to train people, local people in that area, to actually man that clinical setup. They can draw the blood, they can run the tests, and it has been proved. I mean, there is one company in Tamil Nadu which has actually employed village boys and girls to become software engineers. So they can very well be trained to become lab technicians as well, right? And with proper connectivity, a doctor sitting in, say, Bangalore can treat patients from all over Karnataka, right? But then the other problem comes in. There is a limit on the number of patients that a doctor can treat per day. That is where the AI assist comes in. So AI assist can actually screen the normal from the abnormal, and in the abnormals, they can direct the attention of the doctor to areas to look out for, so that the overall review time comes down, the chances of error due to fatigue goes down, and ultimately the patient outcome increases, becomes better. And that is how I believe that healthcare can be truly democratized. Some states in India are taking steps in that direction. And I believe that there is a good future in this in India. And not only India, this is a problem anywhere in the world. The number of doctors is always small compared to the overall population.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for actually breaking it up into simple components and clearly putting across the message. Now, I would like to talk a little about all three of your journey, especially in the early days. You must have faced a lot of challenges during technology development or fundraising, or building the dream team to take your vision forward. So, can you please share some of like one or two challenges and how you solved it at the time? Geetha, would you like to go forward with that, please?
Sure. So I sort of talk. I will bring up.
I think she's having some.
Yeah, your voice is breaking, Geetha. I think while Geetha gets to this, Tatha or Sudhir, can any of you go ahead with that?
Sure. So one of the first challenges that we faced was, I mean, I would say, I think all three of us started round about the same time, but we were the very first kids on the block, so to say. And the number of deep tech startups in India was minuscule. So there was always this element of disbelief. Can this be done in India? Come on, yaar. Nahi hota hai. I mean, Israeli companies, I can believe it. US companies, I can believe it. What India? Nahi chalta. So that is one mindset that had to be fought. And that cannot change in a day. That can only be changed through results. Okay, I am an Indian company, but I have run this clinical validation and these are my accuracy numbers. Then I would say the attitude changes completely from whoever you talk to. So that I think all of us must have faced in some point of time in our lives and all that. But I'm happy to see that thought process has changed over the last 4 or 5 years. So that is one of the challenges. The other challenges I can think of is hardware. Again, hardware in India is not a perfect match. Hardware in China works, hardware in Israel works, hardware in India, it doesn't work. And our problem was that the founding team had very little hardware experience. So we made lots of mistakes and we did not, and the hardware that we really needed did not exist. So we had to create it on our own. Right. So a lot of mistakes, a lot of missteps, wrong steps in the wrong direction, learning on the job, self-course correction. And through that, we have actually proceeded. So one of the advice to the audience here is that whoever is aspiring to be an entrepreneur, if you think you need hardware, better to get a co-founder who's an expert in hardware, or basically get into a collaboration with a reputed hardware design company, which operates in the domain that you want to get into.
Right. Geetha, would you like to go next, please, talking about the challenges? I think the couple of points Tatha mentioned are really pertinent, and I think things are changing now. But from your perspective at Niramai, what did you face very hard?
Sure. Sorry about the wrong bad connection. So, like I was starting to say that because we were coming up with a completely new method of detecting cancer, the first and foremost challenge was to convince a doctor to just get started, allow us to get started, right? And, I think it's completely understandable that, because we didn't have any doctor in the founding team. So we go there and say, hey, we figured out an AI solution. It's completely different from how you have learned in your books and how you have practiced in the last 30 years, and it's going to solve. I mean, you can imagine what kind of response we would have got. That's exactly where we started. But then we told them, right, that's where the clinical validation goes. And I think we should talk a lot more about it. But basically, we told the doctors, okay, you please continue doing what you're doing, right? You use the mammography, go ahead, do it, but just allow us to put this next to it, right? Next to it as in like next room, so that because it's completely non-invasive, no radiation, no change, no side effects. So please allow us to just take their temperature. And we will generate a report side. We will not give it to the doctor. You please watch it. And I'm so glad to say that first, of course, HCG, one of the best sort of cancer providers, right? Cancer care providers today, agreed to sort of this ethical committee reviews and all of that. So basically we went through, and then we were able to put this as a side. And then the good news was that the doctor who first said, I am not going to cut your report, I'm just going to do what I'm doing. After 2 months of comparing the two, when our test said positive and mammography said negative, he said, bring back that lady because I want to see again. Because this, I believe this test may be right. And that lady turned out to be cancer and he would have missed otherwise, right? So that change in mindset happened because of the clinical study that happened. So that was one big thing. The second one, I guess, which probably the other two startups wouldn't have faced is because some of us who started this were at a multinational company before, where I started this as a lab director, as a small exploratory project. So when you come out, what happens, though it's your own idea, it's your own code, it's everything, but then the IP belongs to the corporate, right? So that's what it is. And the challenges of making sure that the complete IP ownership is with the company startup itself is basically, we need to sort of work through that. That happened. And also it also meant that we had to raise funds within 3 months of our coming on the ground. So that was extremely challenging. And thankfully we have wonderful set of investors. Within 1 month, we were able to raise 1 million. And like now I'm thinking, oh, really, we did. So that's sort of other big challenge that we faced, and many more along the way, as Tata mentioned, right? You learn on the go. I never ever knew what a clinical trial actually means, right? From a medical and clinical standpoint, a GCP and all good clinical practice and all of that. But then everything, has been learning on the go. You have to unlearn a lot from the corporate sort of world that you've learned. A lot of cushion you get in the beginning, right? When you go and stand in front of somebody and say, I lead, AI research for Xerox. I get a different kind of treatment, and I say, okay, I'm this small startup, and suddenly all the baggage of the brand goes away, and you know who you are, right? And it's an amazing spiritual exercise as well to sort of reinvent yourself. And then it's amazing. Anyone who wants to do entrepreneurship or do a startup, please go. It's really, really worth it. Life's learning.
Perfect. Great. Now, Sudhir, coming to you, like both Tatha and Geetha had tremendous, industry experience backing them when they, got into this. From your perspective, right after graduation from IT Madras, what were your learnings? How was it different from the others?
Yeah, I think great points by Tata and Dr. Geetha. I very strongly resonate with all of them. So I'm trying to think of other challenges that I can bring on the table, right? I think certainly one of our strengths was we are very naive, and because we were very naive, we thought we could do everything, right? Obviously, there are a lot of challenges in building, right? In finding the right partners, like I said, right? I think Tata mentioned this in brief, but when we started off, we are in a place where the giants. There are 3 big giants out there in radiology, and these 3 manufacturers basically own the entire market. And most doctors, hospitals, there is a lot of skepticism, right? On what do you guys have that these guys don't have? They have 1,000-member teams building all of this day in, day out. So, so finding the right partners, right, early on, especially for us, we don't have a hardware. We don't own hardware, right? So we don't generate our own data. So our data already exists. There's both a pro and con to that approach. The pro is we don't need to invest in hardware. We don't need people with expertise in hardware, which is good. But the other side is that, that is pro. And the other thing is also that data already exists, right? The hospitals have a lot of digital data. People have IT systems that have 10 years worth of data. But then we have to find the right partners who would take a bet on us and give us that data, right? When we are starting on day one, we can't pay for this data. And literally we're asking them for lakhs of images that we want them to hand it over on a silver platter. So, and we probably went knocking on every large hospital And I think those are the very early days that I also realized that Tata was also knocking on many of those doors that we had visited. So I think the earliest challenge is finding the right partners who share data with us, and sort of and share data, and that's been a huge learning experience, right? There are people who on my face told, guys, you should find a job, right? And there were others who would open us with and we were able to find great partners who opened up their entire data sets, entire hospitals worth of data sets to us to start building and give us a shot. And we've gone back to them, delivered products, and to this day they remain champions. That every time people from these large radiology giants come and talk about AI, you guys are still talking. We have already implemented it. We're using it live. We're actually seeing what we are doing, right? So yeah, it takes a leap of faith. It takes a leap of faith to convince doctors. It takes a leap of faith to actually deliver, then follow through and be able to deliver on what you're doing. And that's, I think, the gist of being of entrepreneurship itself, is being able to sell and being able to execute on finally what you sell. And physicians are a tough crowd, very tough to impress. I should warn everyone out there. They have a very high bar. And it's for good reason, right? Because you don't want you don't want low quality products to enter the market, so they should have a high bar. So it's by design.
Right. So the follow up there, as you said, lakhs of imaging data were required. So how did you actually convince the first person to get on board and share the data? I'm sure that must have been right references, but how did you convince that first deal to come through?
See, I think understand that there are lots of different hospitals, different sizes, who have all their own agencies to drive, right? There were large medical colleges who were happy to use new technology as a means to get publications. There are many doctors who want publications which can improve their own images. So doctors are very community driven in general. They participate in a lot of community events, they publish papers. So one of the key selling points we could bring was, hey, you get to get involved in the development of this latest technology.
Right.
It builds credibility for you, gives you a front seat view to what can do. You can publish a lot of data. In turn, you can teach your residents, your students, and give them exposure to a lot of this data. Larger commercial organizations, obviously, they don't, management doesn't easily fall for things like this. So there we've had to get into commercial engagements and figure out long-term arrangements where we could pay back, where we can share some revenue in the future. There are different, again, it all depends on different agencies, but broadly you could be categorized as medical colleges who want to partner for some kind of revenue share, or commercial organizations who you come in with a clear commercial motive. But obviously commercial is not just plain commercial. Obviously you still need belief and trust from a lot of the doctors to come partner with you, and that same level of excitement. You need champions, right? You need champions within these organizations to help.
Perfect. That's the spirit. Now let's talk a little more about clinical evidences, right? All three of you mentioned the challenges which you face there, and understandably so, because development of AI-based solutions is heavily dependent on the support which you get from the healthcare systems, right? And like the different steps, like for example, getting the biological samples or the scanned images, then having the experts annotate it. Then after the model is thoroughly trained with large enough data set, you have to go through the validation and verification as per the regulatory requirements, right? Now, this requires a very robust clinical pipeline within the company so that the technical team can develop at a rapid pace, right? Now, from all three of you, I would like to know that how did you build this pipeline within your organization? Because the three problems you're solving is completely different. So I'm sure that the approach which you had to take must also be different. So yeah, can you elaborate on how did you build this pipeline? Tatha, if you would like to go first. Yeah.
So in our case, as I said, the digital data did not exist. So we actually started collaborations with different laboratories to get physical blood glass slides, and which we brought home and scanned with our first makeshift microscope, or digital microscope, and so on. So the key here is to basically have those data pipelines set up and understand which kind of partner will be able to give you which kind of data. A general purpose laboratory may not be able to give you too many, say, cancer cases, but they will give you a very nice collection of anemia cases and all that. Whereas a multi-speciality onco hospital will be able to give you more of blood cancer cases. And a hospital in, say, coastal Karnataka or coastal Kerala will be more prone to give you, say, malaria cases. So you need to understand these and strike the partnerships up accordingly. And I'll completely second what Sutit said on basically how do you get the partnerships going. In some cases, a commercial angle is definitely needed. In some other cases, the prestige of publishing or writing papers or participating in the tool development works. Next comes the digitization part, which we took care of ourselves. I mean, I remember sitting and scanning slides till 11 in the night when we started. But the annotation pipeline is something which is very important. There, it is important to have medical professionals on board right from the beginning. It could be either as a full-time employee or part of the founding team. It could be as consultants. It could be as advisors. Consultants are required for the operational work. Okay, I give a batch of 1,000 images. Please annotate it with us. Advisors are required to show you the direction. What should be done? I mean, is this a real pressing problem for the pathologist, or is that the bigger problem for the pathologist? As an engineers, we might be tempted to solve the harder problem first, but that is not always what is actually useful to the pathologist. So that is where the medical advisory comes in. That is very important. And consultant, in-house clinicians, if possible, and advisors. The combination of these three are very, very important to get the annotation pipeline running. And finally, when the model is built, you again need to go back to your partners or different other hospitals to do the clinical validations. There also, having independent eyes looking at the results is important. You cannot, you need to have pathologists who are not on your payroll or associated with you to validate the results for it to be credible.
Right. Yeah. Geetha, Sutit, if you want to add anything you did differently in your pipelines.
Yeah, I would like to add, because our problem was very different. If you go to any center in India, nobody had thermal images of breast. Nobody, actually did imaging with this, right? Not just in India, around the world, there are very few thermographers, who take the images and then visually interpret. And if you Google, you'll know that that's also not very well accepted, right? That means thermographers who actually view the thermal images and say whether it's positive or not, were not to be believed, right? Because they're not in the mainstream. So this was a very, very huge problem, as you can imagine, because you have an image, whether it's cancer or not, you don't have any doctor who can say it confidently, right? And typically what you do is, even when you have doctors who are able to interpret, let's say pathology or just, you have multiple doctors seeing it, right? So that you have, amortize across the skills. But here, we don't have any. So what we did was, I guess maybe interesting for others, is, like I said, anyone who is coming for a mammogram, followed by, if it is positive, she's sent to an ultrasound, and if that is also positive, she's sent to a biopsy, basically pathological test. And the pathology being positive is the final ground truth. So every person who was doing thermal imaging went through these steps, right? And we took the histopath answer to say whether the thermal is positive or not, right? And so that was a huge learning, because it was also a huge overhead, because for every image, every data point, we had to set up these collaborations that both Tata and he talked about, where we were able to actually get collaboration with the hospital, either because there is an academic interest for publication or there is a commercial validation, right? So with that, we had to actually image every person, every data set that we have with ourselves. And that also gives an advantage that there's nobody else in this world who has as many data points as we have of thermal image of breast with the ground truth that is this. So that's sort of flip side of it, but it was pretty hard to actually get that. Thankfully, we did find one thermographer, Dr. Ramprakash sir, here in Bangalore itself. My luck, I would say, because I called him and said, sir, you have tried thermography before and you're trying it as a lab test along with ultrasound. So would like to meet you. So he thought I had come there to do the test itself. Then I sort of told the whole story. And for 4 years, he had done 300 images. That's it, for 4 years. So no, that's the kind of, but it was very nice. We still work with Dr. Sir. He's actually a senior radiologist as well. And then sort of he told us what kind of patterns they use. And sort of we went into all of these things. So this data set generation is a very unique challenge, particularly for Niramai, because of currently unused image
Right.
modality.
Okay. Would you like to add anything, Sudeep, to the points?
I think mostly, what Tatha and Geetha has covered. I think the only other additional nuance to it is probably that because we are in a place that already it's digital, but you have all these different manufacturers, different variants of scanners, and all these whole world of different acquisition parameters. So for us, the only other angle that we have to also look at was generalizability, right? So we have to ensure that data sets before we start annotating and training are very representative of the kind of customer we want to cater to. But the remaining, I agree with all the other points that you need to have the right medical advice, right annotations, right data. As good your data is, how good your model is, right?
Right. Okay, good. Thanks all of you. Now, the next thing is, once you have taken the help from these healthcare systems and then built a tool, how do you actually convince them to, start using it? Because the medical professional tend to make decisions, and they trust something which they kind of understand. But when it comes to AI models, neural networks, then they are often perceived as black boxes, right? So how do you enable the medical professionals to adopt AI-based solutions in their regular workflow? And what sort of support do you need from them to actually be able to successfully implement? Geetha, would you like to share feedback on this, given, yeah.
Sure. So basically, how do you make the doctors adapt? There's no shortcut. There is only one thing, that is do a proper clinical study, because it's not about sales at all. You're not trying to sell your idea to doctors, because the clinicians are there for a reason, right? They cannot risk your not working AI model or whatever. It's really not about being favorable to somebody. It's all about being ethical and being, correct for the end user, doing the right thing for the end user, who is the patient in front of them, right? So we had to really go through grilling clinical trials. Even now, whenever we do the sale, right, there will always be a 1 week of, I'm going to send you the toughest patients and you show me that you actually can detect, and then I'm going to. So there is this clinical evaluation, like Tata mentioned, it's completely blind, as in like investigator-led. The third-party people who monitor this trial, so that we do not influence the results or anything in any form. It's a third-party led and conducted study. Very, very detailed procedures are there for doing the clinical study, to the extent that when we were doing this in HCG and Narayana, the top reputed hospitals where we did our first study, if I went to NH, I had to sign in a register saying sponsor came in, and I am not supposed to talk to anybody. I mean, I just came to meet the doctor or whatever, right? Even that is law, right? To that level of interference is noted down. And so only after we have a proper clinical validity and proving that it is at least non-inferior to the existing methods. In our case, we ended up having a better sensitivity and specificity than mammography. Then of course the doctors are there, because it is going to help the user, because there's non-radiation and all that. So just a clinical validation definitely needs to be there. And in this, it's actually a partnership, right? I'm so glad that so far, right, we've actually made friends with so many radiologists in the country, right? And it's amazing to get their feedback, refine the reports in a way that it is explainable. I think one of you were talking about that. You can't just say, yes, it is cancer or no cancer. You have to make some sense. The doctors should be able to understand this better. So we came up with, is it cancer because of vascular reason? I mean, is it because of some blood flow reason? Is it because of, the the areolar, we call it, like, different regions have different patterns. So we actually sort of had to tell about that, and also automatically do a annotation of the lesion as well, right? So all of this, when we do and we explain, they're able to validate it with the biopsy, that is when it actually gets accepted. There's no
Right.
shortcut, as far as I know.
Right. Right. So, Tit, in your case during COVID, you actually collaborated with lots of hospitals. So, how was that experience for you in terms of adoption?
Yeah, I think COVID was a huge change in mindset when it happened, right? Because literally you had entire diagnostic centers who had CT scanners to about 100%. I mean, first of all, your utilization is 100%. Every CT scanner is running as long as they can, and literally 95%, even 100% of the workload is just COVID-19. So the report is the same report that needs to go out, right? And so we, by that time, we had a product that we had learned through multiple iterations by the time COVID hit, on what what the product needs to be. And I'll just maybe briefly touch upon what it is. Right, when we started, we took a software to the market. One of the key things we learned was that it has to fit very clearly into the workflow, right? The doctors are used to certain workflows, and you can't disrupt that too much, right? Especially at least in the world of radiology, they're used to a reporting system, they're used to a viewer. Changing that, disrupting that too much it's a very habitual change. So changing habits in how you use it, it is some effort. So one of the key things that is important is how do we get the workflow to fit, right? And when we first took the product out to the market, it was basically an analysis solution, would help the radiologists read scans faster, right? What we learned over time was that the value was not just for the radiologist, but is often also to the patient, or rather to the referring physician, because the referring physician is really the consumer of these reports. He's really the one who's deriving value in helping the patient being able to make a better diagnosis. So by that time, our product had evolved sort of from a simple analysis solution to something that generates reports, right? And these report is fully automatically generated. It has to be verified, it approves, but basically it fit into the workflow in a sense that radiologists could now use our software not just to view studies, but generate the report, and that report fits into your reporting workflow. Right, and the product format evolved to this stage by the time COVID hit. So COVID hit, what really changed was cloud adoption, right? Till then, a lot of our discussion with hospitals in selling, a lot of the time we would spend on on-premise versus cloud, and most hospitals will try to push on-premise. COVID, that completely changed because doctors themselves didn't want to go to the hospital, right? They had their teams reading remotely. So, and we had a solution that not just enabled telereporting, but also had an AI-based solution that could generate reports, and it would do the entire CT. And CT severity scoring is again turned out to be this perfect problem of being something very subjective, right? Because you are expected to visually score how much of your lung is infected with COVID, right? And with AI software, we could tell you 37.7% of your lung is infected, right? And we could do that with precision that was had less than a 5% variation across scanners, right? Across a 500 data point center. So COVID was really changed that in terms of adoption, because suddenly we were doing, we could pitch the phone directly over a phone call, get remote access, install it. Within one day, we could close the entire and get them on board and get them start using the software. And so that from that point of view, it was really, we really saw a change in mindset in both looking at what is AI can, what is it that AI can do, but to also, hey, let's start using cloud, let's start using tele-reporting and adopting all of this technology.
Right. Very interesting mix of experiences here from both of you. And now I have one question for Tatha, and that is, between the technology innovators and clinical adoption, there is a barrier of regulatory, right? And understandably that, the amount of like the rapid rate at which innovation is happening in computer vision, AI, the risks which are associated, and also the fluid nature of machine learning models, it's not a very straightforward technology to build regulations on. So Tatha, like, can you describe us both from hardware and software perspective, what are the requirements from regulatory standpoint when you validate the technology you have developed?
So for hardware, the requirements are very standard. I mean, C has a very set of guidelines, like you have to pass electromagnetic interference, electromagnetic radiation, ESG tests and all that. So those are well defined. What is less well defined is probably the AI and the software part of it. But there, I believe that the clinical validations that we do actually is half the job done. So ultimately, the regulatory authorities will also give you approval based on the clinical evidence that you show. And the more comprehensive the clinical evidence is, the easier it is for us to get a clinical approval. And that is irrespective of which regulatory body you're going to. It could be CE, it could be US FDA, it could be any other country-specific regulatory body. One thing that we need to keep in mind is basically the processes that we follow. Because as software developers, as IT people with IT backgrounds and all that, we tend to be messy, we tend to be quick and dirty in our work and all that. That does not work when it comes to regulatory approvals. So whatever we are showing as a final output has a history, right? It has a history of development, of validations, of requirement gathering and everything. All those things need to be in place. The quality checks that we have done on our own, the development processes that we have followed, whether we have done a proper design before getting into development and so on and so forth. So for that, it is essential for any startup getting into the medical field to actually maintain that record of development. The development, validation, requirement gathering, and QC testing. But rest of it is clinical validations, which anyway you have to do in order for the solution to be accepted in the market. Clinical validations for the regulatory purpose are not very different.
Yeah, understood. Would Geetha, Sutit, would you like to add anything to the points that I mentioned about regulatory?
Just a bit, I guess, just to bring in the number. So people who want to do a healthcare company will remember this ISO 13485, right? So what Tata mentioned about the processes, right, that you follow in the system. So just to give you a very general aspect of what this is the quality management system of the company is repeatable, is enabling repeatable, high quality product development. That means we are a startup doing it, but still you have to behave within as a big organization, could be like the GEs and Philips of the world, right? Because the users are the same. The doctors need to have the confidence that this was built with proper structured processes, so that when there is a bug, it was noted and it was fixed and all of this. And then every release was tested. So this quality management system that is ISO 13485 is pretty much a must for any of the regulatory clearances that we want to do for any country. Second thing I want to say that is, just to add to what I mentioned, every country has its own regulatory body and regulatory stamp that we need to get. Of course, there are some advantages, like Europe. All the European countries follow the CE mark. So once you have that, you are available. And many of the Asian countries would say, okay, you have a CE mark, then why don't you just give an application that you want to sell in this country, and you can do that. In India, we have DCGI. So we need to understand what is the regulatory body for the country when you're looking at going from one country to another or whatever. So that's the second point. Third point is that the hardware, as Tata mentioned, we do have, because the world is used to hardware medical devices, right? So there is very structured list of tests that need to be done, mechanically, whatever, right? The electrical interferences, electromagnetic interferences, all of those we have to check in EMI, EMC, and all of these tests have to be done. For Niramai, it was a software-only product in some sense, because we consciously made a decision that we will use off-the-shelf, CE-approved, FDA-approved thermal imaging devices to measure the temperature. We didn't want to reinvent the measurement devices, right? So here it was a software device. So what happens for software as a medical device? SAMD is the terminology you may want to sort of Google. And so here there are certain other things, that cybersecurity, right? What kind of cloud are you putting, HIPAA compliance? Where are you storing the data? How are you storing the patient data, right? Because we are trying to build an end-to-end solution. In that particular case, sort of GDPR compliance. So all of that needs to be brought into the picture as well. And then finally, the third piece is when you have an AI device, what you have to think about is the AI model learning in production or learning in development? It's a very different thing. So even FDA has, if you Google, there are so many guidelines that have been given, right? And really urge people who are looking at doing a software as a medical device with AI to study these very carefully. They are complex, but please study. It's actually simple. They have if you think of it like, are you learning in production or are you learning in development? What that means is you can retrain a model, but as long as you have a full test cycle before you're releasing it, right? Just like a software, you should think of it like software next version. And you're releasing the next model. This is called the locked model, that you lock the model and then release it. You're not learning online, right? That's not happening, particularly for medical devices, because the rules for online learning are still not set, right? Only rule that is set is if you learn online, you go every time your model learns, you have to go back to FDA to get a clearance. That's the only known rule which is completely approved right now. Obviously, we can't do that. And that's where like a lot of us are fighting FDA to see what. So there are a lot of total product life cycle and a lot of those, workflows are being defined. Anyway, so this is something to be conscious about. But India, it's amazing. So we do have DCGI, though there are rules. As long as you show that you have clinical validation, like Tata mentioned, and following good processes for developing these systems, and you're not doing any harm to the end user by just suddenly making some irradiation or whatever, you're good to experiment.
Perfect. Great points, Geetha. I think that summarizes especially the AI requirement components. Now, the last question from my side before we move to audience Q&A is the culture of innovation, right? Now, if I look at AI, machine learning startups in healthcare in the globe, there are only handful in India, right? But what SigTuple, Niramai, at least both of you have done, and even pretty well, you have honed a lot of patents and publications, the clinical validations which come with it, right? So how did you cultivate this culture of innovation within the company? And what would your suggestion be to actually scale it to the country level and we come up with more interesting products and services which are, merge of AI and healthcare systems? Like any of you, Tatha or Geetha, like any of you like to just share what did you do differently and what were the rapid innovations coming from?
Yeah, you see, Yogesh, I do not believe we did anything differently. So a lot of companies, say the multinationals in India, actually do a lot of cutting edge research. When I was in Yahoo or before that in National Semiconductor, we wrote papers, we wrote patents and everything. It's just that somebody has to believe that an Indian startup can go and file patents. It can write papers in good journals and conferences. There is no dearth of talent. It's just that you need to bring in that culture that, okay, this is possible. Not only possible, but extremely doable. Do the research, get the results out. You need some help writing papers. I'm sure Geetha can help. I have also tried my bit to help guide people in writing papers, but it's doable. It's just about the belief that it is doable and possible. There is no dearth of talent.
Just to add, I think our training or both of our background in corporate, this is one definitely good. Multinational companies, right? That has definitely helped us think more IP first, right? Cover the IP. It's not just whatever new ideas just don't throw, right? And that's a mindset you get being in research labs in HP or this, right? And I was also a patent coordinator for the whole lab and all that. So the type of culture we put in at Niramai is that every time there is a new idea, so we kind of, or you want to release a product, we kind of just say, okay, why don't we sort of discuss the different novel elements of it and see if it can be covered, right? So we, at least at Niramai, we consciously make an effort to sit at least for half an hour, say, okay, what are the new things that you have done before doing this release? and we need to cover it. So that that check we do. Yeah, I mean, it's good that we are doing something new in the world, first ever time. So obviously there's a lot of learning. And so in this process, the common thumb rule I would say is, was there a problem you spent like 1 week trying to think about how to solve it, and you had that aha moment, and this is how I got the solution, then that may be worth a patent. That's a rough thumb rule, I would say, right? So, and if something that, a requirement was given and you, ended up coding the algorithm for it, it's unlikely that, it is patentable. So that's a sort of rough thumb rule. And generally what we do is, as Indian companies, you have to file in India first and then go to other places. So we also decide which countries, where we want to do it now itself, or do we want to do it what is called as a PCT application within a year. So you can buy time for 30 months and all of that. You can, of course, talk to an IP lawyer. And if you're an Indian startup, there are some subsidies. I would think that people should, take care of Startup Karnataka and Startup India subsidies, where there are attorneys who can do this for like 5,000, 10,000, and the remaining money they can get. So all of this you need to utilize and read up about it, register as a Startup India, startup, whatever, right? Designation, whatever. And then you will get all these benefits. Yeah, I mean, happy to answer any other question offline on this. I think it's very, very critical, in my opinion, to cover IP before you go and release things, especially for deep tech startups, especially for these deep tech startups from India, because you want to prove that it is innovative, and this is one way of proving, and your valuation also increases if you have a number of patents.
Right. Perfect. Now moving to some of the interesting questions we have received in the chat box. The first one is, from testing plus validation till market entry, there is a long journey ahead for startups to sustain itself, right? So what kind of strategies have you developed to secure some cash flow in the company without depending on investments or funding? Do pilot projects give startups an opportunity to earn some revenue? Yeah, so I think the first part of the question is the time when you are not really generating any cash. What strategy do you develop to secure the cash flow within the company? This question is not addressed to any three of you, so feel free to share your perspective.
Yeah, I can maybe try to take a jab at this.
Sure.
We've gone through cycles of this, and I think it's I don't think there's a black and white answer here, right? You're not healthcare is a place where obviously it's not like SaaS. You can take an MVP to market and start selling it. You do need evidence to sell. You do need evidence to get someone to really pay for the product, right? But that said, you have to get creative, right? There are ways to. If you solve a pressing enough pain problem, you can go up to diagnostic centers or whoever it is that your customer is, and partner with them in innovative ways. I mean, we've done deals where we've taken money upfront before we even developed a product, right? And then we give them a sweet deal they can't refuse in turn for what they pay upfront even before the product is developed. You have to, I mean, I don't think there's a black and white answer here, but I do agree it is a challenge. The other thing that I might add is there are great government funds, right, for someone starting out. Biotechnology Ignition Grant, BIRAC gives you a 50 lakh grant, which is great money. And I know a lot of startups, including ourselves, we got our MVP up, and started using money from the government of India. I think the challenge really here is you need to come up with that MVP, which is not too ambitious. I know some of us can get into very deep product platform thinking and say you want to build the world, but the question is, what is the right MVP that you can take to market, get enough validation to at least get someone to pay, if not right now, but commit to paying to you, and you figure your way out from there, right? So you need, it's a question of identifying the right problem, right MVP, and the right timeline. Problems in healthcare are huge, last, and they can get, there are really large, cheap problems that you can go after, but you need to be realistic on what it is that you can achieve within a limited amount of time and money.
Got it. Geetha and Tatha, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, so just on the gestation period for revenue, right? You won't have the hockey stick it's going to be a long this, and then hopefully the hockey stick will start, right, in terms of revenue growth. So definitely we need to have patience, and you should need to find, finding investors, find investors who understand this, right, and only then they'll put it. So you reach out to only investors who are aware and who actually invest in health tech, right? And so that's important. And then so it said, grants, that's a sort of the advantage of working in healthcare. So there are grants in India, grants also from startup, Karnataka and Startup India. So that's something you may notice called Elevate 100 from Startup Karnataka. Like that, every state has its own, entrepreneurship, incubation and other facilities. You need to use that. I think that's very, very helpful. A lot of these, corporates also give freebies, right? Free AWS credits, GCP credits. We live on credits, free credits for many years. Even now, some of the credits are still there. So get into some of these accelerators and incubators who give you that cushion and sort of, discounts that help. So those are some of the other ways of actually. The other thing we did was also to apply to grants like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, CDC, UK as well. So these happened to where we basically expressed to them that here is a technology that we have built. And for example, for Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, it's not about breast cancer, actually. It's about the technique of doing AI on thermal imaging. And we are experimenting a completely new disease with this, because this is not about only cancer. And I think one of the questions I saw, like, is it only for breast cancer? No, it can be for several other type of cancers, other type of abnormalities. And when you are doing that, there are several research problems that come in. So research funding that we get through these, has been extremely helpful as well. I guess grants and this, and one initial thing that we did, for the MVP that Sudeep talked about is, we went to this Dr. Ramprakash sir, who is a thermography expert, and requested him that we will generate the reports, and he can ignore the report, but he'll sign, right, putting his comments at the end, right? So that way we could actually go to market within 8 months of our launch, right? 8 months of the launch, because the report that the end user was getting is actually reviewed by a doctor and so on, but our tool was just used as a tool by the radiologist. And so you need to figure out, and we need to think differently. Each problem is different, but how do you sort of go to market first is something that it's not just for revenue. It's really not about just revenue. It's also about learning from the market early on and sort of making the right corrections. And for that reason, you definitely need to try and go to market as early as possible.
Okay, thank you. Tatha, next question is for you. The question is, how can we handle the problem of generalization, which is common problem faced in deep learning? So if a framework works for a set of people, how can we ensure that its result will be reliable for a larger set? And if we cannot, how can we make a product that is actually feasible and producible for masses? The problem of generalization, Tatha, in deep learning.
Very good question. So I would say the question is slightly off, in the sense that whatever works for one set of people usually works for another set of people as well. I mean, human blood is the same, no matter which country I live in. Chest X-rays would look pretty much the same. Okay, Indians might have some pollution-related changes in their chests compared to people living in developed countries, but overall the structure, human anatomy is the same. Human cells are the same across the world. So even if you solve for people in India, you'll be able to apply the same solution to people outside India as well. Problem comes in not from the variability of the human anatomy. Problem comes in from the variability of the input capture. So Sutirth mentioned that there are 3 different giants in the radiology space, right? They have their own modalities. There are different input parameters for catching scans. In our case, in the case of SigTuple, the problem of staining comes in. What kind of stain is being used to color the cells? That varies from one lab to another. Some labs use suboptimal staining. And what happens if your imaging, the camera changes? Deep learning models are notoriously overfitted on the camera.
Right.
It is not well documented in literature because most of the common data sets use multiple cameras. But when it comes to medical data sets, they're probably captured with one camera or all. So these are problems. There is no easy answer to any of these problems. You'll have to diversify your data sets, try to make it as domain independent and domain as possible. And if there is a slight domain shift in terms of the modality changes or in terms of the camera change or the stain change, you either have to, there are only two ways. You get more data and retrain your model, which is not a very scalable approach, or you build in some domain adaptation algorithms into your system. We have tried both with, I would say, a good amount of success on both sides.
Interesting. From Geetha's and Suthir's perspective, anything to add or?
So I would like to add on the diverse data set part. I want to double click on that aspect that I mentioned, right? So diversity in data set is very, very critical, especially in your training set, right? So here diversity could be from different type of machines, different type of environments for us, right? You know, was it taken in a hospital? Was it taken in a diagnostic center? Was it taken in a village setting, right? So these things are completely different. That is one type of diversity. The second type of diversity is, which is most critical in my opinion, is the different type of abnormalities we are looking to find, right? So there is cancer. The cancer can be in different stages. Stage 1 cancer, stage 2. So you need to have the whole sort of the diversity in the data set itself. And then the age groups in which the cancer is found. And different types of cancers and different kinds of benign conditions, right? Benign conditions could be fibroadenoma, fibrocystic disease, and all of this. So we actually need to get into the domain of the medical domain. Of course, you have the doctors as your partners, right? So you actually sit, I've actually gone and sat in conferences like SAPCS, which is one of the biggest San Antonio breast cancer conference. And then all I did in the first time was to note down all the words I did not even understand. And then came back and tried. So, literally you need to sort of get into the medical domain words and then say, okay, is it trying to handle all of these types? Because that is the first question a clinician will ask you, right? Have you found microcalcifications? And have you found fibroadenoma? So these are questions, right? So you need to make sure that your training set has diverse enough for all subcategory of diseases as well. These are hand-picked data sets. So what we did was, instead of random sampling, again, we didn't have the luxury of millions of data set available on the web, right? We had to create all of them. So we took all of these, and instead of doing 80-20 rule for training, validation, all of that 90-10, whatever you're taking, right? Instead of that, we handpicked what we call as golden training set, saying, okay, we are going to look at these subclasses, picked it up, and then said, this is the golden training set. Now you can add any other, additional piece. And this has taken us a long way, right? Whichever hospital we go, the results are good. This has helped us in the generalization quite a bit.
Perfect. Yeah. So we have a lot more questions from the audience, and we would request them to take it in the breakout rooms. So Srinath, I would request you to create the breakout rooms and move all the speakers in respective rooms. The audience can also move.
Yeah. So thanks guys for the event. So we'll be creating the breakout rooms in a minute. Until then, we have a links for the IBLoT Slack channel, website, and a LinkedIn page on the chat. We'll be officially ending our live stream right now. Everything beyond this is an informal networking session, right? So thank you all for participating. Thank you so much for the speakers, for amazing insights. Thank